Hi guys, so today we're going to have a tour through our nervous system. Sounds fun, right? So let's start. The human nervous system can be divided into two main parts, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, while the peripheral nervous system consists of nerves which connect the body to the central nervous system. So, first let's talk through the peripheral nervous system. This system consists of nerves which run through the body that contain hundreds of microscopic nerve fibers called neurons that are bundled together. The nerves that arise from the brain are called cranial nerves, and those that arise from the spinal cord are called spinal nerves. As you all know, the whole nervous system, including the central and the peripheral nervous systems, are made up of nerve cells called neurons. There are three main types of neurons. They are the sensory neurons, relay neurons, and the motor neurons. Each neuron has a cell body consisting of a nucleus surrounded by a little cytoplasm. And the branching fibers from the cell body are known as dendrites, and a long filament which carries impulses away from the cell body is called axon. Now, let's discuss the functions and structures of each neuron in detail. So let's start with the sensory neuron. As for the structure of it, there are three main points. 1. The cell body of the sensory neuron is present along with the length of the neuron. 2nd, the sensory receptors are found in the sense organs and the cell bodies in the central nervous system. 3rd, myelin sheath is present, and the function of this neuron is to carry impulses from the receptors in the sense organs to the central nervous system. Next up is the motor neuron. In the motor neuron, the cell body is at one end of the neuron, which is found in the central nervous system. Also, there is myelin sheath in the motor neuron. The function of the motor neuron is to carry impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors. Now, it's turn for the relay neuron. The relay neuron is found in the brain and spinal cord. The relay neuron is the link between the sensory neuron and the motor neuron, which passes the impulses coming from the sensory neuron to the motor neuron. One of the most important parts in sending nerve impulses is the synapse. A synapse is the junction or gap between the axon of one neuron and the dendrite of the next. Nerve impulses are started by receptor cells and then are passed on to other neurons, which is passed to a muscle cell or gland cell. Now, when the nerve impulse arrives at the synapse, it releases tiny amounts of a chemical substance which sends off an impulse in the next neuron. Okay, so now let's talk about the central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and the spinal cord. The main function of these two is to bring about coordination among different parts of the body, as this is needed for proper functioning of an individual. The spinal cord consists of thousands of nerve cells called spinal nerves. These spinal nerves divide into roots called dorsal root, with the dorsal root ganglion, cell bodies of a sensory neuron, and the ventral root. The central region of the spinal cord is the grey matter that contains all the cell bodies apart from those in the dorsal root ganglion. At the outer region of the spinal cord is the white matter. Okay, now I am going to tell you about the reflex action. So what happens is, in emergency situations, the spinal cord can receive and transmit impulses to bring about rapid, often protective responses called reflex actions. Therefore, reflex actions is a rapid automatic response to a stimulus, and the nervous pathway involved in the reflex action is called as the reflex arc. So the sequence of events in a spinal reflex will be like this. First, a stimulus, for example a hot object, is received by the sensory receptor. For example, the sensory receptor located in the finger. Then, an impulse is generated and carried along by sensory neurons towards the spinal cord. The impulses arrive at the nerve endings at the grey matter and then diffuse through the synapse into the relay neuron and again into the motor neuron through another synapse. Then, the impulse travels away from the spinal cord along the motor neuron. The nerve endings of the motor neuron are applied to the effector, for example, a bicep muscle. Then, finally, a response is produced. For example, the bicep muscle contracts to lift the hand. Well guys, that's all for that example. And that's the reflex arc. Then, there are voluntary actions and involuntary actions. Voluntary actions are just as the word itself says action, that you do it on purpose, where a decision is taken from the brain. However, involuntary actions are actions that are done without your knowledge or control. For instance, breathing or blinking.